So in an English country hillside churchyard, there stands a tombstone of drab gray slate. And if you look carefully, you can read the faded words that are etched there. It says, "Beneath this stone, a lump of clay, lies Arabelle Young, who on the 24th of May began to hold her tongue." Apparently, Arabella never learned the wisdom behind the saying, as you go through life, you're going to have many opportunities to keep your mouth shut. Take advantage of all of them. Today, we are halfway through our walk through the Epistle of James. This epistle is traditionally attributed to James the Just, Jesus' brother, who had become a leader of the early Christian movement. And the consensus is that James was writing this letter to Jewish Christians who had been dispersed or scattered outside of Israel due to the persecution. So he was writing to Christians, converts, who had already heard and believed the good news of Jesus. So he's in James, this epistle is an attempt at teaching them what they should be doing with their faith after their conversion. How they should be living out their faith. Which is why the most famous line from the entire book of James is that you should be doers of the word and not hearers only. Now, if there's an overarching theme so far in the first two chapters that we've studied, it's that James is cautioning his readers, his audience, to not be contradicting what they said they believed by what they actually did. Don't go claiming to be a follower of Jesus if you're not going to behave in a Christ-like way. Which brings us to our text for today, James 3, 1-12. "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will face stricter judgment. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is mature and able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. If we put bits into our mouths of horses to make them obey us," sorry, that's my place, "we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships, though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, yet they're guided by a very small rudder, whichever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a word of iniquity. It stains the whole body. It sets on fire the cycle of life, and is itself set on fire by Gehenna. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species. But no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse people made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth comes a blessing and a curse. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening as both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives, or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh. I believe I told you all that the old line about when preachers go from talking about other people's sins to speaking to our own bad habits and sins, that we say they've gone from preaching to meddling. At this point, James had been clearly explaining how genuine faith is a faith that works, that will inevitably reveal itself in a lifetime of good deeds. But so far, he's mostly been dealing in generalizations, speaking of good deeds without explaining or giving any specific concrete examples. But now he's getting into specifics. Now he's going to talk about the very words we speak and how we interact with each other. Now James is going from preaching to meddling. Because he's telling us not only do we need to walk the walk, but we also need to talk the talk. And this is not a new concept to James's audience. Psalm 141, David prays to Yahweh God, "Set a guard over my mouth, Lord. Keep watch over the door of my lips." It's also a lesson that Jesus taught on more than one occasion. James is simply building on and reinforcing the teachings of his brother Jesus. In Luke 6, the good person out of the good treasure of the heart produces good, and the evil person out of evil treasure produces evil. For it is out of abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. Matthew 12 says, I tell you, on the day of judgment you will have to give an account for every careless word you utter. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. At this point, I need to call a quick time out for a digression or a clarification, or call it whatever you want to. The vast majority of people in the first century Israel and all the surrounding countries were illiterate. The literacy rate is estimated to have been less than 10%, even in the larger cities. Most scholars say it averaged out to be about 3%, which means that of this group, if we were in the first century, only 2 of us would be able to read and write. Now, why does that matter? That shockingly low literacy rate means that most of the information was spread by word of mouth. Even when a letter from someone like James or Paul would arrive to a church, it would be read aloud to the congregation by one of the 2 or 3 people who could read or write. Which is why today's passage, and so many others like it, are talking about the damage done by the tongue, the spoken word. We, however, live in a highly literate culture. And it seems like actually most of our interpersonal communication is done via the written word. Emails, texts, social media. And to be honest, the impersonal nature of electronic communication, I think, makes the issue worse, not better. Spend an hour or 2 online, read some Facebook posts and comments, or the comments on an online article. And I would hope that, like me, you'd be shocked at the vitriol, the spirit of meanness, the belittling and demonizing that goes on regularly, especially during election season like right now. Things are said over email and text, and particularly over social media, that I hope would never be said face to face. The name calling, belittling the other, calling those with whom you disagree disparaging names, demonizing those that belong to a different political party or religious group or ethnic group. It's appalling, especially when it's coming from those who profess to follow Jesus Christ. My heart breaks every time I see someone who checks in from their church and then hours later is on Facebook arguing about politics and calling their opponents nasty names. Not only endorsing, but celebrating hatefulness and intolerance and a callous disregard to those who were created in the image of God. All of which leads me to this. I think James and Paul and even Jesus himself would agree that cautions, advice, and prohibitions that are given to the spoken word, the tongue, also apply to other forms of communication, to emails and texts and social media. I think it's very easy to see how they apply. So take those words to heart. It's not only the words that you say with your mouth, but the ones you say with your fingers. My projector went down and I had a top 10 list. Aha! Here we go. Let's take a look at some of the many, many ways that our words can cause great harm if they're not held in check by responsible, God-like thoughts and motivations. I've got just a small sampling for a top 10 list. Number 10, slander and lies. This is an easy one after all, isn't it? Because it's one of the 10 commandments, right? Thou shalt not bear false witness. James puts it another way later in this book, but he says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. But hearing that commandment and actually carrying it out can be different things. Because sometimes it's not even intentional falsehoods, but only telling partial information. Shading things to make the other person look bad and make yourself look good. Number 9. This is going to hit close to home, guys. Gossip. This is a tough one for all of us. Gossip is defined as idle talk or rumor about someone's private life or the act of sharing such information. And, we've got some great ways to gossip without calling it gossip, such as cleverly disguising a share of a prayer request in a way that is actually salacious. I found a great example of this. One of your co-workers, George, he's been very upset lately. It's affecting his work, his personal care. He's just having a tough time, and it's affecting his entire life. And you know that George just lost his child. That's the reason for the behavior. George told you that you could let other people know if they ask. So you share this information with others that work with you. And they do what they can to help and support George and his family in this horrible time. On the other hand, if you took that information and tell your co-workers that not only that his child died, but how, and you take relish in sharing the details, you've gone from sharing information to gossip. It's a slippery slope. Number 8, insults. The old adage, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me, is bunk. It is simply not true. It's a big fat lie, y'all. Words do cause harm. They can hurt. And the bruises can last a very, very long time. A theologian named Dale Bruner once said there are lots of people in mental hospitals because some hurtful word is lodged in their psyches like a bullet in their spine. Proverbs 12:18 tells us the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. This is one of those that I see all the time on social media. Because you disagree with how the person's political party, so you're going to call them names. You're going to tell them they're treasonous. All right, number 7, before I start preaching even harder on that point. Grumbling and complaining. I'm going to need a minute on this one. I think I just got the wind knocked out of me. I think we're all guilty of this one too. This one cuts right to the heart of what it means to be a Christian, though, right? Because we're supposed to be people of joy and enthusiasm and hope. And yet it's all too easy to let our words and our actions suck the joy and life out of the room around us. And there's little room for that in the body of Christ. Number 6, speaking rashly. This is one of James' most vital pieces of advice. He says, everyone must be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. We have this bad habit in our culture that when we're having a conversation with someone, we're not really listening and focusing on what they're saying because we're formulating our response already before they finish speaking. Which means we're not getting the full meaning of what they're trying to tell us. Because we're going to try to score points. The principle here is simple. Listen more. In each of our conversations, particularly when they get tough or heated, listen first. Hear them out. It's amazing how much more sensible and productive this conversations can be if we listen more than we talk. Number 5, cursing. Now, a well-timed vulgarity might provide emphasis to a point. I mean, even Paul throws one in with his letter to the Philippians. You know, where he says he suffered the loss of all things and considers it filth or rubbish, depending on your translation. That word he meant is it's a true word for manure. Let's put it that way. It's been sanitized in our biblical translations. He uses it for kind of a shock value. And they may do that. That might add some color to our language, but we have to be careful to not cross a line. We need to be consistent with our identity as followers of Jesus Christ. And let's be honest, if we're going around dropping F-bombs every other sentence, we're not being a good witness to our faith. Number 4, not using encouraging words. Paul writes, bear one another's burdens, and this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. And in Romans, he says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. See, our words have the power to harm and encourage, but they also can encourage and build up. Instead of our using our words to lay others low, we should be using them to lift others up. But how many times do we put our own needs and our own emotions ahead of others? We should always be uplifting. Number 3, one of my own areas of opportunity, not practicing patience. Being in control of our words has to be rooted in a spirit of patience. We are so quick to let our emotions take over, and then we pay the price, or others around us pay the price. Proverbs 14 says, whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly. Ephesians 4:2 says, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing one another in love. Charles Stanley wrote, patience isn't something we're born with or receive instantly at the moment of salvation. Rather, it is developed over time with God's grace and our cooperation. That's something I have been working on for a long time. You'd think I would have learned it by now. Number 2, hypocrisy. This was Jesus' most consistent accusation against the religious leaders of his time. In Matthew 23, he calls out the religious elites when he says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, for you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but the inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Or he says, you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside look beautiful, but inside are full of the bones of the dead and all kinds of uncleanness. So you also, on the outside, look righteous to others, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. He said there's too much talk and not enough action. There's too much talking about the law and not enough acting in love. There's an old saying that was, in numerous times, came up in my research for this, and it's hard to say. It says your walk talks and your talk talks, but your walk talks louder than your talk talks. It's what we've been talking about with James. People see what you do, and if it doesn't match what you say, they don't care what you say. You can claim to be a Christ follower all you want, but if you are negative Nelly and always putting people down and insulting people and cursing and insulting and gossiping, they don't care that you claim you're a Christ follower, because that's not what they see. And number 1, not speaking the truth in love. Irish musician Chris Llewellyn of the Christian band Rend Collective. By the way, I posted Our Lighthouse on our Facebook page this morning. You've heard that we sung that song in church. He wrote, there's a sentence that sounds to my ears like the removal of a pen from a grenade, sending me scrambling for cover and bracing for a doctrinal explosion. I just have to speak the truth in love. He writes, this weaponized paraphrase of Ephesians 4:15 is regularly used as a license to insult. Like most of the verses that we recycle as baseball bats to use as weapons, once you put it back into its context, it's a little more nuanced than we tend to use it. Ephesians 4 starts off with, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Speaking the truth in love is not about beating someone over the head with what's wrong with them, but it's about striving to maintain relationships. It's not dropping a truth bomb and walking away not caring what shrapnel damages people, but rather being faithful in the long haul, bearing with one another. We need to speak the truth to build up, not to club those with whom we disagree. Later in Ephesians, Paul says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Our words should be beneficial to the hearers of those words. That is speaking the truth in love. We had the acronym we used in middle school, THINK. Is it truthful? Is it helpful? We could use that as well. If the truth you're trying to speak in love isn't helpful or loving or uplifting, what was that first piece of advice? You have many opportunities to keep your mouth shut, take advantage of them. I'm going to close here today with a little exercise. Picture this in your head. It's a beautiful day. You decide to go for a stroll, and you pop in by the branding iron to pick up your favorite brew. And as you turn around from the counter, someone bumps into you, and half your coffee ends up splashed on the floor. So the question I'm posing to you today is, why did you spill the coffee? The obvious answer is that somebody's knocked into you. That's why you spilled the coffee. But the real reason you spilled the coffee is because your cup was full of coffee. If your cup was full of tea, you would have spilled tea. If your cup was full of lemonade, you would have spilled lemonade. See, at the core of it all, the thing that you spill out is what you got inside when you got shaken or jostled. Getting bumped simply released what was already there. So when life comes along and shakes you, which will happen, I guarantee it, whatever is inside you is what's going to come out. If you are filled with anger and resentment and malice, that's what's going to come out when things don't go your way and you get bumped. If you start from a place of joy and gratitude, if you let the Holy Spirit fill you with love and grace, then when the world predictably knocks into you, what's going to come spell out of you? It's going to be love and grace and gratitude. You've got a conscious choice here with what you fill up your spiritual cup with. So if you fill it with the fruit of the Holy Spirit, if you fill it with joy and gratitude, when you inevitably do get shaken, the only thing that means is that you now have room for a refill.